workshop meeting, whatever we call it these days. I'm going to talk about this survey which we ran for the national workshop in July. If you were at that workshop, you might remember that Deb and I talked about the results from this survey in terms of the Australian results, or Australian and New Zealand results. Since then, we've done a little bit more collation of the overseas results, and it's actually quite an interesting picture. So there'll be a little bit of repetition if you saw the first part, and I hope to God I can remember what it's about because I haven't looked at it. I gave this presentation in the UK at the Kettle MSOR conference a couple of months ago. I haven't done much with it since. So. This survey was developed, in fact, it's fitting that we're giving it here because it came for interest from other FYI Maths members, and most particularly from Kaz, who sent me an email early in the year saying we're getting screwed with assessments and having to run them online. Do you have any suggestions? Since at that point we just managed to get some of our assessments face to face. And then I talked to Deb and Michael, my colleagues in the steering committee for FYI Maths, and we decided that a good way to, if we're going to do something about this, we needed some evidence. So we'd run a survey and see just what was happening in maths assessment. Initially, we thought Australia and New Zealand, but then we decided to expand it and include the rest of the world. We ended up with 134 responses, 62 from Australia and New Zealand, and the rest from a fairly wide range, quite a lot from Canada and the US, a few from UK and Ireland, and 3 from the Middle East. So that's sort of just a grand total of where things came from: 48 from Australia, 14 New Zealand, 38 from the US, which was quite pleasing to see, and 19 from Canada, because as you'll see, their results are quite different to ours. So the first question was, what format will you use for exams in your next exam period? And remember, this was done around July, so things could have changed, and I'd be interested to know in the discussion if there's been any change in your situations. You'll notice there's quite a few there that are either only on-campus supervised meant that the respondent was only running on-campus supervised exams. Multiple formats means that there's a mixture, so hence the total number of responses is more than the total number of people that completed the survey. But you'll notice a large number of only on-campus or on-campus exams. But we'll see, well, and if you look a little bit more into the numbers, you can see where they're coming from. Is that working? Yeah, 11 from Canada, 13 from the US, and not much from the rest of the world. And similarly with multiple formats. A lot of online unsupervised. See why that's not so great. And quite a few not including having no final exams, a few starting to move into online or on campus, depending on student location, which of course we're having to do because of the number of online students. So what are the issues? Well, online has forced a change in exam writing, and I think every conference I've been to in the last 3 years, someone's been talking about ways of alternative assessment. Those of us at Western Sydney were at in the maths group were at a meeting last week that Learning Futures pushed on us of alternative assessment techniques for mathematics. But it has forced some change in exam writing. It's been a money saver for the university. I think that's self-explanatory. But of course, there's been a lot of negatives to it. Multiple choice becoming a lot more common. In our case, Western Sydney staff have become responsible, and the school has become responsible for paying for invigilation for those exams. It's increased the workload, and I think there's now a move at Western to increase staff workload, faculty workload, because of the amount of extra time that it takes to run exams. The cost shift back to the schools, the academic integrity, which seems ubiquitous everywhere. It's just, yeah, I know for some reason senior management doesn't seem concerned about it. Student stress, which has become even more lately as classes have moved back face to face and we're still being forced to have online exams, students are suddenly confronted with having an online exam, having never done anything online during the semester. So that's increasing the stress even more. All these other ones I'm sure you've seen. Privacy issues, difficult instructions to follow, noticeable jump in results because we're not quite sure who's actually doing the exam when it's online. The take-home exams, yes, they mimic reality in situations where you can do that, but in courses, subjects like mine, where it's a low-level course, it's been very difficult to, it actually increases the complexity of the exam if you try and give them something which mimics reality, because we're really just trying to test basic mathematical knowledge. Of course, any take-home exams or assessments increase the possibility of cheating, and we've seen how much that's increased in contract, not only contract cheating, but sharing between students. And it's difficult to know what students are involved with. Because the hybrid good option for students who can't come to Australia, at least, and that was a common comment from people. So is the format different from that used prior to 2020? The majority, yes, but again, you'll notice that the majority of those are from Australia and New Zealand. North America either didn't leave the format that they had or they've returned to it. And the UK and Ireland and Germany and the Middle East are in much the same boat. They're back in the situation, if they ever left it, of face-to-face exams or what they were using before. This was, I think, the big issue in July was the uncertainty, and this is one of the things that's been causing stress to faculty, I think, is we just don't know what's happening. More than half the people are unsure what's going to happen in the future. And again, at Western, we've seen the situation where we had quite a few exams face-to-face in the autumn session, just before the last meeting. This semester, we were only allowed to run 3 face-to-face exams. And we have no idea what they're doing next year, I don't think.
And again, summer is.
And yeah, summer they've said no face-to-face exams, and
yeah, it's the same format for engineering math subjects.
It's just a mess for us. So that's an issue. Is it optimal? Again, if you look at these numbers, if you take out the North American ones, most people are not happy with the way exams are being run. But interestingly, in the US and Canada, they're back to running exams the way they want them. So and the other interesting thing is Canada had a very similar sort of journey to us in terms of COVID and lockdown. So, you know, we've got to ask the question, why are we doing something so totally different to them as we go back? Do you have input into the decision making? This is another point of contention. The majority of people don't, and probably most of the ones who do who responded to this are people who are in senior management positions. Otherwise, all that we have is the ability to recommend or to request and then get told no. Which examination would be better for your situation? You can see where the majority are on campus. I mean, there's lots of numbers there, but the points to notice, only one person wanted online supervised exams only, and only 2 people wanted to include online supervised exams. Nobody that responded to this survey wanted only online unsupervised exams, and yet, you know, that's what we're being pushed towards.
Sorry, so these responses that includes university management types?
A few. It was sent out to the first year in maths mailing list, so some of those people are deans or associate deans. The majority are lecturers, people in maths faculties. But yeah, you know, we know what we're looking for: on-campus supervised exams for the large part. Yeah, nobody wants online unsupervised exams. In fact, some people thought that no exam was a better option than that, using continuous assessment. For those doing online supervised, 8 respondents were on campus supervised, which was probably a large part of our cohort from Western Sydney. And most of them, another 6, preferred other options. This was interesting. There was a question of whether the exam format is different from pre-COVID and whether it's optimal. And as you can see, most of the people whose exams haven't changed from pre-COVID are happy with what they're doing, or they're the optimal exams, and the majority of people who have different exams to pre-COVID are very much the suboptimal. So, or not what they consider optimal. There is, however, a small proportion who are happy with the change, or unhappy that they haven't changed, or happy that they have changed. So, I mean, there are some people who have made leaps in formats for exams, and I think it would probably be good to find more details from them to find out what's working and why they've gone that way. But for the most part, it seems that maybe we're traditionalists and we just like face-to-face written exams, or maybe there's something more than that, which is kind of what I'm inclined to think. So what else should we know? Of course, we know there's a major issue with cheating. Stephen, you can probably give an idea of how much misconduct has gone up since we've had online exams, but it's got to be 10 or 20 fold or more, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was very interesting when we had the face-to-face. We only had one misconduct, and that was someone who didn't switch off their phone. But when we had the online, it was, it's all different things. Check or working in a group.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been huge. The workload in finding that has increased. I know Stephen's gone through, at Western Sydney, gone through quite a few exams and whole papers and submitted them to Chegg and found copying.
So I was talking to Leanne about this the other day, and she, putting all of this together, workload and academic misconduct and so forth, has estimated a 10,000-fold increase in our workloads, right? And when I sort of said this was an exaggeration, or maybe it's 1,000-fold, right? She dug her heels in, right, and started quoting a lot of the things that make it feel like it really is 10,000-fold.
Yeah. So that's been the issue, and that was certainly the issue in the middle of the year. This question of reputation damage, I think, is one that's just not being addressed. The universities, that people that I've spoken to, the universities aren't interested when we mention academic integrity as part of one of the reasons that we want to go back to face-to-face exams, although they do seem to respond to student experience being affected.
Can I address that as well? Because the university's administration makes that point, but there was a smaller subject in our change that Charles Aziz was running, where she actually, there's only 21 students. So she asked every one of them whether they would prefer an on-campus exam or an online exam. 18 of the 21 students said they would prefer an on-campus exam. Of the 3 that said no, because the exam ended up having to be online, this is what the university management is insisting, 2 of the 3 who said no are up for academic misconduct.
And the third didn't do the exam.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is something that we have to start pushing back on, that the student experience is that they want face-to-face exams, because they actually, the majority of them, want to behave honestly and don't want to be thought of as cheating.
I also want to know that everybody else is not cheating either.
Yeah. And talking to another one of my colleagues at Western Sydney, who's been giving face-to-face classes all semester, her students were suddenly presented with an online exam where they had to sign into Zoom for the invigilation. And suddenly there was all this stress in the first half hour of the exam because the students couldn't get in, didn't know how to get into Zoom, didn't know how to set things up. So it was just more stress.
I was aware of this because I had the same thing with my projects, the most advanced first year math projects we offer. And there were about 90 students enrolled, but the disengagement of our students are only 63 of them who sat the final exam, which all of their assessments throughout the whole semester had been on campus. That's not quite correct because there's an online offering and a day offering. So I think it was 48 of the day students have done purely class tests, supervised on campus, etc. And I had to make sure that very detailed instructions about the Zoom invigilated online final exam, 4 Zoom meetings with colleagues who basically not paid for this, supervising them so that we all could fit all the students on one screen, and putting up past sample papers of the same format, right, giving them every opportunity to understand how it's all going to operate. And I must admit, with doing all of that, I didn't get any problems in the final exam. But it's a whole lot of extra work to maintain, reduce the student stress in such exams.
Yeah. And I mean, the other comments that we got on this were in terms of the online exams, management don't seem to care, or they're saying that it's the students like it, therefore it's good. There's continual pressures to cut costs, which probably understandable given what we've gone through in the last couple of years, but is this the right place to cut them? And they see it as a disconnection from core business.
There's a comment in the chat here, huge problems with technology with online exams, connection, fallout, etc. Students, lots of issues in maths require scanning of solutions, expiry, etc.
Yeah, I think that's been another issue that people were commenting on. It has given us a chance, so some people commented to use software for exams, even the face-to-face ones that we're run at Western Sydney, a lot of them are using numbers now to generate questions, so the students are getting individual exams. And it's made us learn to write better questions with the electronic format. A lot of trepidation about what the future holds. A lot of staff having very few options because it's being directed. We're not given choice. We only have feedback as a mechanism, and very few respondents in a place to give input which is going to go anywhere.
And that's for engineers preliminary. All your assessments were running numbers. So
Yes.
class tests as well.
Yeah, so my students were used to that form of assessment.
So I made the choice not to do it for Maths for Engineers 1 because they weren't.
Yeah.
Because the 4 class tests were all on campus, normal face-to-face class tests.
This was just something that I put in, or we put in after for the conference in the UK, the Kettle Emsall conference, because whilst this seems to be, looking at those numbers, it seems to be a localised issue of Australia and New Zealand. People at senior management level attend conferences like this as well, and if some of our colleagues are going to start talking overseas, maybe other universities will start following suit to us rather than vice versa. So we sort of just put that point out there to others.
That's assuming that the counter message
doesn't,
coming from ground level, doesn't resonate too much.
Well, that's true, but I mean, there is then going to be that discussion.
That's exactly why Kaz put this around, because at our higher levels, they were saying other universities in New South Wales and Canberra all moved online, and we're like, is that really true? And actually, no, it wasn't really true, but they don't see that. And we're going, well, okay, we need to sort of stop this and say, well, no, it's not true. You're making these global statements, and let's sort of try to get some evidence to push back on that, which actually did help UOW, not as fully as we would have liked, but we've seen some improvement.
Well, the other thing that I've seen in the last few weeks, I think it was in the Herald, University of Sydney, and I think UNSW are going back to face-to-face exams from next year. So we can only hope that a few more follow suit from that, take that lead.
And that decision's been made at the very highest levels.
Yeah.
I read. So, for example, DVCA at UNSW.
Yeah,
He was making it really clear in the article. I think his name is George.
I don't remember it.
He was making it really, really clear that he isn't doing it because of endemic problems with endemic
Cheating. Yeah.
it's not the only reason. He talked about technology issues, and I was talking to somewhere I know through chess or other means, who's an academic in economics at the University of Sydney, was forced to run an online exam and ran it actually quite a similar format to what we did, sort of three numbers where there are a couple of parts of computer answered questions and then a longer part where you had to sort of write and submit your answers somehow. And with the computer answered questions, he gave detailed instructions. And then for about a third of the students, randomly, I'm not sure that how this happened with the technology, the instructions were transposed with the questions. So you talk about student stress, right? They're getting instructions but no questions. Right? And that's the sort of thing that can happen. And I think that that's probably driven that decision. It's not just the academic integrity issue, it's also the student stress, the things that can go wrong with technology, all of these sort of things. And now that it's possible, I'm actually very glad to hear that two of the capstone universities have actually decided to go back to face-to-face next year, because we've been desperately pushing it at Western and still no joy.
All right, thank you.
If everybody speaks from the floor, I've had a comment in the chat online, just speak a little louder. So these things here are the microphones, but just speak a little louder if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
My comment about the online exams is we now have we can pick various different modes depending on accreditation or non-accreditation, but we are allowed now, if we are happy to run our own exam face-to-face, we can have a paper-based face-to-face exam that's allowed. And so most maths exams are now back on paper, which is wonderful. But we had an incident about the technology failing. So someone had a cyber attack on the university at the time of one of the exams. So they had to cancel something in the order of 30 exams that were scheduled for that time and reschedule them. So that is actually a big student experience problem and a big management problem that, with any luck, will push the powers that be to go, yeah, this is not a great idea. So
And that penalises the best students, the ones that have actually prepared for an exam at that time, and suddenly it's delayed.
It seems as though, just to sort of go macro scale here, it seems as though there's been a sort of a big movement towards online, for decades now, really. And and part of that has been a consideration of how every kind of function of a university could possibly be morphed or changed in such a way that it could be delivered or make sense in an online context. And I think maybe what we're seeing now is sort of a bit of maybe a more mature kind of attitude. So a bit of a stepping back and saying, maybe there's some things fundamentally that just don't match that way of doing things. I'm being optimistic.
that's nice.
Maybe that's what's happening, is that there's just a bit of a reevaluation. Not everything can fit, but the thing is that there's also these really big, powerful economic incentives. This question of scale comes up all the time. Scale. And when universities are under the pump financially, they're going to be looking at all opportunities. And this one just screams out at you, I reckon. If you're, in senior management, it would scream at it.
I think that senior management may have seen online as a way of saving lots and lots of money, but I don't think the reality is that they're saving lots and lots of money. They're spending more time with people checking things and reviewing things. So we're using an online invigilation service, but I think we have to put more money into people reviewing the videos of the students than we did if we just plonked 1,000 students into a gymnasium and just had 20 people walking around.
Or it's a false saving where basically we're supervising our exams for nothing.
Well, my next point is that there's a huge impact on academic time. Not only when we set, like when I set an online exam, I'm writing 3 or 4 exams because I want it to be mixed up and randomised, and that's a huge cost for me. And then there's all sorts of other issues, and then dealing with the students afterwards because things they didn't submit every page of working, their computer went down, they'll have to resit. Even all those things is massive.
I mean, we for the engineering maths subjects, we were allowed for the second time this happened, first semester last year, and then again this year, to run them on campus. That they were online exams, but they had to do them in computer labs on campus, right? Which is obviously a much better solution than a properly supervised for the academic integrity. But all the extra works, for starters, a normal face-to-face exam, there's going to be separators, they're spaced apart, etc. Computer labs are much smaller, they have to sit next to each other. So I have to write 2 versions of the exam. So that everybody's doing a different version to the person sitting next to them. The exams branch did at least timetable the rooms, but we had to not only organise our own supervisors, but also provide the examination rooms, writing tools and everything. All of these things are extra work that we have to do, even when we're allowed to run on-campus exams in some format.
But that was the reason it's that format, because we had to navigate these hurdles to just get it face to face.
To get face to face. Well, thank you for your efforts, because I reckon because of UWS and New South Wales, I told our DDC, because he was saying, 11 out of 12 universities are running their exams online. And I wrote and I said, well, actually, UWS are allowing maths to do theirs face to face, and UNSW are also allowed to do theirs on paper face to face. And so, well, Newcastle was the one, right? That was the 11 out of 12 were doing it online. But Newcastle was the one that wasn't. So I couldn't quote Newcastle. But he's now turned around and says, okay, so now they will centrally invigilate our accredited subjects, paper-based, but we still have to do anything else that's not in an accredited degree. But hey, I was quite surprised that even that happened, and it came on the traction of.
You weren't as surprised as me, and if you ever want some bedtime reading, that's the longest email you're ever going to read the email I had to put together, right, with all the conditions, essentially telling them that we would do everything ourselves, right, to get that happening in the first semester last year. And I was astounded. I actually thought this was going to be a futile exercise. So I was actually very, very pleased that we managed to get that happening. And a huge amount of work to get that done.
But then they clamped down this latest. They wouldn't allow it, except for
the engineer. They couldn't disallow it for the subjects for which they had already allowed it, sort of during the heart of the pandemic. But they still disallowing it for everything else, basically.
Well, now you can go back and tell them a Wollongong.